Thanks very much for joining us. So the atmosphere is starting to build up now. When we last had you on the program a few hours ago, there was a few people just on my right-hand side. And one gets a sense that this is going to be a very, very important speech for President Ramaphosa to set the tone for what the presidency will be like, the country will be like, and to deal with the expectation.
I was a little bit worried earlier, fearing that the stadium might not fill up. And the fact that it's now filling up means that it means a lot for people because they've had to wake up very early in the morning to be here, around 5, 6. So it's a very important occasion for them.
But it's also a first, Professor Ngletana, the first time that South Africans are given the opportunity to attend the inauguration like other invited guests.
It's a public ritual where the president comes to take an oath in front of the people, promising that he will live up to the mandate of his office.
As you speak, I just want to let everybody know that Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia, has just arrived. That's the person that you're seeing there. And it is encouraging to see all of these heads of state arriving beyond SADC.
It is quite encouraging, but also to get back to your question earlier about the importance of this speech, is that we all know that Cyril Ramaphosa has always wanted to be president. And finally, he got to be president. So my sense of him is that he has a sense of history. He declined an appointment into the cabinet as foreign minister, but back in '94, but agreed to write the constitution.
Right.
Because he realized that this was a historic document, and for him to be associated, this makes him a man of history. So he has a sense of mission and history.
Allow me to interrupt you, Mr. Ngletana, Professor Ngletana, His Honourable Mr. Danny Fall, President of the Republic of the Seychelles, and his spouse arriving here. As you know, that we are at the vantage point where we are seeing all of these dignitaries arriving, and we're going to have to interrupt you every now and then, which is very unseemly, but it also gives us an opportunity, I think, to talk about the leaders who are coming here, the class that President Cyril Ramaphosa is joining. I was just saying to Peter now that Faure Nyasimbo of Togo is going to be here. We're talking about these dynastic administrations that we seem to be seeing on the African continent. That's a big challenge going into the helm of the AU next year, to say, perhaps let's tidy up house.
Well, the continent is a diverse crowd,
Generational mix.
Generational mix. I mean, King Swati came in here with a massive aircraft, right? We were just talking about it earlier with colleagues from a fairly impoverished country, and yet you are landing in a very massive thing. But the fact that you have all these presidents here shows that South Africa is still highly regarded.
But I think you mentioned a very important point that we were talking about with Peter earlier on, that of economic regional blocks. And I was wondering why South Africa, with at least if you look at the economic muscle that South Africa as a country has, but compared with the other regional blocks, ECOWAS, the East African Commission, the SADC region seems not to be doing as well as those. What lessons could be learned from those economic regional blocks?
I think we've had some challenges in the region in terms of democratic rule. Dictatorships don't do well. If you're a dictator in your country,
all right. Just as you say this, and I want you to finish this answer, because we have to recognize the arrival of His Excellency Mr. Brahim Ghali, who's the president of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, and we'll talk about them as well, because they have their own issues that they're dealing with. But carry on finishing your statement as Mr. Ibrahim Ghali, President of the Sahrawi Republic, alights from the car to join his fellow caste members of heads of state.
The challenge is always to get different countries to work together, to be committed to the same objectives, right? Recently, I think SADC is getting things around. In Tanzania, we have a new president. He also started off well, but is becoming some kind of a rogue now. Zimbabwe has sorted itself out. So we're getting there. That's the challenge also that the AU faces, right? That you have people who commit themselves to a certain to conventions and protocols, but yet they don't follow up to those protocols. And with African leaders, there's always hesitance to intervene, in internal affairs, when in fact the argument is that you have to respect the sovereignty of a country, but the mess that is happening internally impacts on other countries as well, because people leave those countries, they go to countries where those countries are doing well in search of good life. Everyone has to do that, right? So the fact that you can't intervene doesn't work.
So it's no coincidence that Africa Day is the day that was chosen for President Ramaphosa's inauguration. What kind of foreign policy do you see him having, particularly on the continent?
Well, firstly, this improves our image, right? I think we've been a laughing stock of sorts, There are all sorts of Afro-pessimists out there. So when South Africa got into this detour, went on to waste 10 years, right? They were like, typical African country with a typical, leader that's not necessarily clued up about things. So now we have a president who does his work, who does less singing and is committed to his job. Hopefully the respect that we had, which we had lost, we will regain, and then therefore begin to redefine our agenda. Because South Africa is very important, not only for the continent, but for the entire developing world. And we've always been respected. There are a lot of things that the developing world needs to challenge in terms of global trading, the inequality. You develop countries dumping their stuff on our countries, right?
Okay.
So those are things that developing countries must take up strongly, but they can
developing
do so
countries like Namibia, this just arriving, the president there, Hage Geingob, getting out of his car and being greeted by the crowd here. Another developing nation that is doing well, actually.
Doing well also because the old guys are out, right? You had Nuyomo and you had Nuyomo's friend and now a young guy. So it's a good thing because we do need new leaders with new ideas.
You talk about fresh blood though, but Africa seems to keep on talking about an old issue, and that is the issue of land. Namibia, our neighbor, has also been highly invested in that. And listening again, I'll refer to former Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn. He spoke about the fact that we cannot resolve the national agenda or the national questions without dealing with land. Why is it African leaders are struggling with that? Peter, perhaps if we could just introduce the Mozambican president who's just arrived.
His Excellency Mr. Felipe Jacinto Nyusi getting a very warm welcome. Bem-vindo, they say in Portuguese. He's just arrived and is making way up to join the other heads of state. So you can answer the question.
That's also a very good development, actually, because when he was anointed, so to speak, to become president, the previous president, his predecessor, thought that he would protect him because his family, Dos Santos' family, had amassed a lot of wealth. The other thing that we don't talk about, because his daughter is apparently the wealthiest daughter, right? A woman in Africa.
She's been in the papers a lot.
She's celebrated as the wealthiest woman when in fact that wealth was looted. That's the part that we don't mention. So this fella has come in.
She's worked hard and she's earned it all.
Dos Santos hasn't been working hard. He's been president and yet he amassed billions. Where does he get that? Was he earning his salary in billions? I mean, come on, that's absurd. So the new president has come in, clean up, right? And even challenging members of his own party, a new guy. So those are the kind of leaders. It's not happening throughout the continent, but we are beginning to see signs of new things happening.
We're going to tell you in just a moment who's arriving, but I'm actually thinking as you're speaking, the president, so that's John Magufuli, the president of Tanzania. But I was actually just thinking now of Uganda's president, Yoweri Museveni, who was here not so long ago. And he does not brook any questions around whether or not it's time, after more than several decades of being power, to hand over power. How important is that discussion for African leaders at the moment? Because I was asking you about repeating the same conversations over and over again and pretending to put new solutions to them. Can we do it with an old cast? Do we need to move on? even with the solutions that are being proffered?
We need to continue that debate, Sepiso. The fact that we haven't gotten rid of these dictators doesn't mean that we have to give up and resign ourselves to this mess. We can't resign ourselves to dictatorships. People deserve good leaders who are accountable. Right? You still have tomorrow, so resigning yourself to the mess today.
But herein lies the rub.
problem.
Herein lies the rub. When do we define it as dictatorship and when do we define it as democracy? The African question here, because there's, and I'm going to talk about Rwanda's president Paul Kagame at a time when people were saying he is authoritarian, and the people in Rwanda were actually saying we want him to continue and have another tenure.
The fact that you have elections doesn't mean that you have a strong democratic society. Elections are just one process. In fact, you might find that some people who wanted to contest the elections were prohibited from participating in those elections. So you still have, dictatorial tendencies. Kagame is a product of his own country, still a traumatized society that seems to have a liking for a strong leader. Because of the history of genocide that they are coming from, right? So when you look at their society, you have to contextualize it. Contextualizing doesn't mean forgiving, doesn't mean not being critical. But if you were to look to measure the democraticness, for instance, of Rwanda, it wouldn't get 10, certainly, because opposition is not allowed, the media is tightly controlled. Yeah. Kagame doesn't even entertain critical views.
Not too far from the region, and we're going to start interrupting more and more as these heads of state start arriving. And here we have His Excellency Mr. Salva Kiir Mayardit, who's the president of South Sudan, a country also after a long civil war with the north, got its independence, and then civil war continues.
Well, it's a country that has had troubled history. Countries are complex. Countries cannot be made in a lab. You don't put chemical A and chemical B, boom, you have a country. They have to sort out their own problems, and those things take time, especially if the problems were created over a long period of years, right? So those things are expected, but overall, there are good signs emerging. It's a country that has a rough history, Peter.
Yeah. It's interesting that you should say that, because when you look at the developments in the north and the Sudan, there are those who say it was always going to come to this, because the problems that saw South Sudan in the position it is actually exists in the north, in the Sudan. And interesting how the civilians have come together in not partisan ways, but the issues remain the same.
Yeah, again, President Ramaphosa did some work in that part of the world as well as an envoy. So another item on his in tray when he sits as president, starting from about an hour from now.
We need to take leadership. That's the most important thing. We cannot continue, excusing ourselves from getting involved in such incidents, saying that these are sovereign countries. Because South Africa is expected to take that leadership, and if it doesn't, it suffers the consequences of bad things that are happening elsewhere. One does, of course, wish that the AU could be a lot more forceful when it comes to resolving internal problems. In this day and age, you cannot have dynasties. Yeah. We are in the 21st century, for God's sake. So we need to. There are sanctions, there are measures in place when countries do not conform to universal standards. And we have African peer review, for instance. So we need to use that mechanism. The fact that countries agreed to subject themselves to the African peer review is a recognition that they have certain common standards that they have to live by.
And speaking about peer review mechanism, the APRM, Macky Sall, the President of the Republic of Senegal, has just arrived. He's somebody that has been hailed as a Democrat, somebody who has really turned things around in Senegal and created greater participation of the youth in governance, something that at a regional level we really should be talking about more deeply as well.
These are some of the excellent cases in the continent. It's a diverse situation. if you look at Kenya, for instance, Kenya was plagued by dictator, one party state and ethnic violence. But now Kenya is leading in terms of IT. Things have stabilized. We have a lot of discoveries of minerals in the continent, right? Is it Ghana that has a few years ago discovered oil?
Indeed.
And Ghana had serious problems, especially in the 80s.
But some say the problems begin with the discovery of oil on the African continent. The black gold has been behind many a conflict, so some say, Peter.
Yeah, you know what? We are talking a lot about the continent. It's Africa Day. We must do that. But let's not forget also that this today is a very special day for the people of South Africa, because they're seeing the inauguration of the 5th president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And you can hear some of the song and the dance that's taking place at the moment, and one gets a sense it could be an ANC rally when you look at the colours that are being worn and the songs that are being sung, the unity song being enjoyed at the moment. And why not? It's their president, he won the election, and it's a new day, a new dawn, as they've been describing. But another head of state is arriving now.
So that would be Congo Brazzaville,
Yes.
because earlier on,
Yes.
and that would be the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo, because earlier on we did mention that okay, so they're saying Togo.
Yes, we've talked about
Nyasimbe. We're talking
Fora
about him
Nyasimbe.
earlier on. So that is what is the scene here at Loftus Versfeld. I must say, on a very hot day, we were worried that the weather may actually keep people from coming to the stadium. Many came pretty prepared in their numbers. Umbrellas are up, and just enjoying the general a mood of excitement, I think mood of hope that we can see from people here. Some of them certainly saying that they're here to see it with their own eyes. The president-elect taking his oath of office and waiting to see if he keeps them.
Yeah, indeed. So the president has to talk not just to the international community, the faithful that are here. They heard the party message. What's going to be the country message to the people?
The cloud has lifted. We've been through 9 terrible years. We have a president who's different from the predecessor, promising a lot of things, but promise is good. He's talking a good game. Tumamina, public service. This is a new beginning. So the words are good. They are promising, but we still have to remain vigilant. We have to make sure that the institutions are working. We cannot be mesmerized by slogans. It's good to have affection for your leader, but you must always be alert to the fact that those leaders are prone to mistakes. They're human, right? So we have to be vigilant. In as much as we love him, we still have to hold him accountable, and to ensure that we have to make sure that the institutions are working optimally. This is a historic moment for him. The speech is not so much about him being sworn in about today, but it's about where the country comes from. The kind of challenges or problems that we have had to endure in the last few years. He has to reflect on that. Bad leadership, a sense of a gloomy mood, national mood, right? The public debate had been dumbed down. We got defocused on stupid things that we're discussing inwardly. So he has to lift the country and get a sense that he's launching the country into a different trajectory.
So talking about distractions, I must say for those who heard cheers, it was the band that was walking onto the field. And just to tell you some of what's coming up later on, we'll have the service chiefs later on, Peter, the 6 SANDF generals, admirals, and 6 SAPS generals also ascend to the podium. We'll see the podiums or the generals proceed to the Western Stairs, and we'll see also the flypast that will occur, and that is going to be a highlight for us because we will actually have somebody from the military talk to us about what exactly are the machinations behind all of that.
The pomp and ceremony of the Defence Forces, the Armed Forces as part of this. Again, another thing that we celebrate quite a lot across the continent. You see